In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to disintegrate objects using geometry nodes. So in this tutorial, I'll show you how to create this disintegration effect right here, and you can apply this Geometry Nodes Modifier setup to any object, and then you can animate the values and make the object disintegrate. And if you'd like to download this modifier setup, I will have a free download on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. You can find the links in the description. So you can download the modifier setup for free, or if you'd like to help support me and this channel, then you can throw a couple of bucks into the price box on Gumroad before purchasing, and that's a great way to send me a little tip and help support this channel. And this modifier setup has a few customizable values. So here's the geometry node setup on the modifier properties, and you have this dissolve mesh slider, and so you can animate this dissolve mesh slider to make the object dissolve. Then we also have the detail level, so if the detail level is turned to 0, it's going to dissolve the mesh by the faces, but if I turn the detail level up, now you can see it's going to be more detailed, so it's basically going to subdivide it, and so now the dissolve effect is much more detailed. And then we also have this random seed value if you just want to kind of randomize it. And you could also animate this value if you just want to make it jitter around, and that also looks pretty cool. Alright, so I'm in a new scene in Blender, and I'm just going to start by deleting everything, and then I'll just press Shift A, and I'll go here to Mesh, and I'm just going to add a monkey head, but you can add this dissolve effect to really any mesh object. So I'm now going to click up here and click and drag to split the window, and then I can click right here on the editor type, and I'll change this to the geometry node editor. And then I can click on new here to add new geometry nodes, and when you add new geometry nodes, you can see over here on the modifier properties, it has added geometry nodes modifier to the object. And so I'm just going to rename this geometry nodes modifier setup to Disintegrate Objects. So the first node that I'm going to add is a node which will delete the mesh. So I'll press Shift A, and then I'm going to start typing in delete, and I'm going to add the delete geometry node. And we'll put this in between the group input and the group output. And when I do that, you can see the monkey disappeared. And so now I need to add another node into the selection to tell it what geometry we want it to delete. Because right now it's just deleting all of the geometry. So I'll press Shift A, and then I'll start typing in random, and I'm going to add the random value node, and we'll drop this down here. Now you can see this is a gray socket, but then this is a pink socket, and so what we need to do is click on the float here, and we need to change it to Boolean. This way they are both the pink sockets, and so they can connect properly. So I'll now take the value, and I'm going to put that into the selection. So now it is just randomly taking different parts of the mesh because this is a random value, and so now it's telling it just to randomly delete parts of the mesh. Now if I make this bigger, you can see there is a probability, and so if I drag this up and down, that is going to control the dissolve effect. And then there's also this random seed value, so you can change this, and that will just randomize the random values. Now you can see some parts here are kind of large, and that is because the faces are pretty large. If I go into edit mode, you can see that face is quite big. So there's a few things you can do to fix this. So one thing I can do here in the geometry nodes is press Shift A, and I'm going to search for the subdivide mesh, and I can put the subdivide mesh after the group input, and that way it's just going to subdivide the 3D mesh because it's right here after the group input. So I can now turn up the levels, and if I turn up the levels very high, you can see the disintegration effect is much higher quality, and it has a lot more detail. So I'm now going to add up the custom values. So let's first take this probability, and I'm going to plug this into the extra socket here. Now if I press the N key to open up the side panel, and then click here on group, I can rename this. So I'm going to rename this to Dissolve Mesh. So now if you go right over here to the modifier properties, go to the geometry nodes, you can see we have this customizable slider here just to dissolve the mesh. And I can also checkmark this single value, and that's just going to get rid of this button here. This button is used for other things like vertex painting and things like that, but I don't need it, so I can just checkmark the single value with the dissolve mesh selected. It just makes the modifier look a bit more clean. So now I can also add this level here, so I'll drag the level into the extra socket here, and if I double click on this, I'm going to rename this to Detail Level. So now I can just click on the arrows here to turn that up, and it looks much more detailed. And then I can also take the seed, and let's plug the seed into the extra socket here, and I can click on this to rename it, and I'll rename it to Random Seed. So now I can just drag this around, and that'll change the seed. And then also if you want to on the random seed, you can click on single value just to get rid of that other button there. Now regarding the amount of detail, I do want to show you a few other methods for adding detail. So if I just select the cylinder object, let's say I want to dissolve this object as well. So what I can do is click on Add Modifier, I can add Geometry Nodes, and then if I click on the dropdown, I can choose the Disintegrate Objects. So now I can disintegrate this object, but you can see that the disintegration effect is quite large. So what I could do is turn up the detail level. So I'll just turn the detail up really high, so that looks cool. But now if I turn the dissolve mesh down, you can see we have a problem here. So basically this node right here, the subdivide mesh, it is subdividing all of the faces, but this object has been shaded smooth, and so it's basically subdividing all these faces here, and so now the edges don't look smooth, they have these little bumps here. So you could turn the detail level down to get rid of that, but then if I try to dissolve the object, the dissolve effect is quite large. So an easy way to fix this is to turn the detail level down, and then what you can do is click on Add Modifier, and you can go to the search here, and you can search for the subdivision surface modifier. So the subsurf is going to smooth it out, so as I turn up the dissolve mesh, you can see some of these areas, like right here, this is kind of round, and so if I don't want this to happen, I can put the subsurf modifier before the geometry nodes. So what I'll do is click here on these dots, and I'm going to drag up, and I'm going to stick this right here, and I'll just turn the subdivision levels up to like a 3, so it is more detailed. So this way, if I turn the dissolve mesh down, you can see the edge of that cylinder is nice and smooth because of the subsurf, but because it has much more geometry now, I can now turn up the dissolve mesh and you can see it looks very detailed. So that's how you can fix that issue if you have smoother objects that you want to dissolve. Now, if you have a very low poly object like a cube, then when you add the subdivision surface modifier, you can see that it's going to smooth it all out and make it very round. So now it is dissolving the mesh with more detail because of the subsurf, but it doesn't look like a cube anymore. So if this is happening, you can change the Catmull-Clark to simple on the subdivision surface, and this way it'll subdivide the faces, but it won't actually affect the geometry. So you could do that if you want to, and now if I turn up the subsurf level, now you can see it's much more detailed, or you could also just delete the subdivision surface, and you could turn up the detail level instead here on the Geometry Nodes Modifier setup. So just depending on which object you're using, you may want to add that subsurf modifier, or just use this detail level on the modifier setup. So I'll now show you how to animate this value if you want to animate the dissolve effect. So what I'm going to do is drag the timeline over here, maybe to just like frame 40, and then what I can do is put a keyframe on this value by hovering my mouse over the value, and then I can press the I key to insert a keyframe. And you can see it is now yellow there, so we've added a keyframe. So I can now just drag the timeline over to where I want it to end, maybe just like 120. Then I can take the dissolve mesh value, I can drag it up to 1, and then again hover your mouse over the value and press the I key to insert a keyframe. And if you now drag back and forth on the timeline, you can see that dissolve effect is being animated. And if you want to edit the keyframes, you can click right up here to change the editor type, and you can change it to the graph editor. And then if you select the object, you can see here is the geometry node setup. You can see it says geometry nodes there. I'll just close this side panel, and you can see here is the keyframes that we've added. So this keyframe here has made it fully dissolve. So if I want to dissolve faster, I can just drag the keyframe back, and now if I play this, you can see it's dissolving really quickly. Or I can drag this out if I want it to dissolve longer. And then I can also click on the handles here and kind of drag these around. If I want it to start to dissolve slowly and then dissolve faster and faster, I can play around with the keyframe handles there to change how quickly it's being dissolved. So then for the final animation, I just made a cool sci-fi background, and I modeled that cool cylinder object, and then I had the monkey head spinning inside the cylinder, and I added some emission lights to make the monkey head really bright, and then added that dissolve effect. And that's how I created that cool little sci-fi animation. And if you'd like to check out the Blender file of the finished animation that I created, then that will be included with the free project files. So again, you can download that on my Gumroad store and Patreon page with the links in the description. And if you'd like to send me a little tip, then you can throw in a few dollars into the price box on Gumroad before purchasing, and that's a great way to help support this channel. So that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for watching.